The vote that wasn't.
The vote that wasn't.
The vote that wasn't. I think it was about 11:45 that Nancy Pelosi called off the vote. It was late. I don't know. We don't. It looks like we have a small enough crowd that we can tuck in fairly. Well, let's not sit where you want to sit because I want you to see the screen. Good morning, Bobby. Welcome. How many of you had a chance to read a little bit of the material that I sent out? Good, good. What we talked about doing today was trying to tackle the so-called soft or social infrastructure proposed by the president at $3.5 trillion. Now, and I knew when sending this out and actually when picking the topic that things were changing so rapidly, we wouldn't know until literally today what had been agreed. And I also, I think, anticipated that maybe nothing would be agreed, and that's certainly the case. The state of play, as I understand it, you all understand, I think I tried to describe it, but do most of you understand, do you all understand the two hard infrastructure at 1.2 trillion and the soft at 3.5 and the way they interplay? Just briefly, the 1.2 trillion has been passed by the Senate on a bipartisan basis. The bipartisan effort took weeks or months, really, led by Joe Manchin and others on the Democratic side, but joined in by about 10 Republicans. It's not bipartisan in the sense that a majority of both houses voted for it, but it does have about 10 or 12, no, it has 19, 69 to 31, it has 19 Republican votes. And that's for roads and bridges and things that we typically call infrastructure. Passed by the Senate, it now goes to the House. But in the House, for the last several months, the Progressive Caucus has said, we will not take it up, we will not even vote on hard infrastructure until the Senate indicates that they will accept soft infrastructure. And what does it mean by the Senate? You all hear, we all know the term reconciliation or budget reconciliation. A strange part of our political process involves the ability for the House to pass on a simple majority, that is to say 50%, the Senate, to pass on 50%, not subject to cloture, not subject to filibuster. Those measures that have to do with budget reconciliation. And where this originated, I personally don't know, but I can imagine the idea being let's not allow the annual budget to be blocked by a filibuster. It's just a majority vote. And so if we can tuck things, if a party, either Republican or Democrat, can tuck things into a budget reconciliation, they have 50%, just half, they don't have to bother with the other party. Both parties have used that because they don't have to subject themselves to the risk of filibuster. Both parties have used that for decades. The soft infrastructure proposal does use that technique. It characterizes itself, or the Democrats characterize it as budget reconciliation, thus saying only a majority of the Senate, not more, needs to vote for it, and it's not subject to filibuster. The problem is that two senators, Joe Manchin from West Virginia and Kristen Sinema from Arizona, have indicated they won't vote for it. And so the Progressive Caucus has said, we will not take up a vote in the House, because if we vote for it in the House, with our vote, We don't need any Republican votes. It will pass the House. There's a 3 representative majority of Democrats. And it will go to the Senate where, if we've got the earlier agreement, it will pass without a risk of filibuster. But we have to know that the full 50% of the senators are on side before we'll take up hard infrastructure. Manchin and Sinema are not on side. And so last night, Nancy Pelosi was playing a sort of a hardball game. She was saying, I can convince the progressives to take the risk on soft infrastructure, vote for the hard infrastructure bill, it will pass the House, and thus become law, and thus there'll be a win.
But I think the word hard is not a good word there.
What's a good word to use?
I would say it's kind of a Christmas tree of stuff that they call infrastructure. About 17% of it's road, bridges and roads, which I call hard infrastructure.
Okay. In terms of understanding this, Forrest has pointed out, and this may be something we all want to just talk about a little bit. If the so-called hard infrastructure bill, the bipartisan bill, agreed to by 69 Republicans, is nothing but a Christmas tree of goods for various people, and we shouldn't do that. That's also a possibility.
I'm not saying we shouldn't do some of it. It's not what I call infrastructure.
But you would say the roads and bridges, the 17% is.
Yeah, and I would also argue that broadband, countrywide, is an infrastructure issue in today's world.
What to? Broadband.
Broadband.
What I'm not prepared to talk about today, it's not that I don't think it should be talked about, but I don't have the component breakdown of what the press calls the hard infrastructure bill. But I take your point. And I think one of the things that's fair to talk about, if 19 Republicans out of their caucus voted for that bill, that means that a majority of the Republicans in that Senate caucus voted against it.
They said they would get some consideration by that vote. It wasn't a permanent vote.
No, I know, but well, I think the 19 said they passed it. If the House passed it, it became law.
Possibly.
Right. But my point still is,
To bring it to vote at that point.
I'm sorry.
They agreed to bring it to vote later for permanent as a law.
Okay. But my point is still a majority of the senators in the Senate on the Republican side voted against it. And I haven't looked at the polls recently, but my guess is the majority of the Republicans in the country are opposed to the so-called hard infrastructure bill. Is that right? Now that's a change from only a few months ago when majorities of both parties approved both bills. And I think what's happened, well, it was this very slim majority. We'd have to get the polls out. I don't want to debate that. I'll say that I'm wrong, but I was close. One of the things that's happened that changes this whole discussion is the popularity of the president. A popular president can get a lot of things done, and this is saying the obvious, that an unpopular president can't. And there are two things now that I don't think will ever work for Biden, and that's the pandemic hasn't gone away as often as we've all wished it so, and the president has said it so. Both presidents, it just is not going away. And of course, Afghanistan. And those two things have taken such a knock on Biden's popularity. He's gone, I think, from 57 to 43. Those are approximate numbers. And what that means is anything he proposes is going to be harder today than it might have been. Any comments more on the hard infrastructure side? Just by show of hands, how do in this group, how do we feel about that $1.2 trillion side of the discussion?
That's the first one that was
The so-called bipartisan,
the smaller one.
well, 1.2 trillion, it's tiny.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, I think that should be passed. So a handful thus far, that's not very exciting. That's Well, the reason for that is simply spending more money than we should be spending after all the pandemic spending? Or is it the Christmas tree nature of it? Doug?
My recent opposition to that is based
Sal, can you turn it more into this?
my current opposition to it is based on inflation. Right now, the economy is short of people, it is short of stuff. And if we're going to do all this infrastructure, where are these construction workers going to come from? Where's the steel going to come from? Where's the other building materials? And I think right now that the economy is essentially nearing physical capacity. Any additional burden of infrastructure, no matter how good and how on its own beneficial, when you put it in the aggregate of the economy, it's going to be too much with respect to inflation. And I'm going to go back to your comment about Biden's popularity. Yes, we have Afghanistan. We also have the border. You know, this border is a mess and it's not getting any better. The economy is shaky. We got these vaccine mandates coming on in all these blue states. Things are not going well on a number of fronts that are indicating poor judgment on the part of our president.
I take seriously what Doug and Bill Tickle say, he hasn't said it yet, about our infrastructure. They were the business of roads and bridges. I mean, if truckers aren't in favor of improving roads, I'll listen. So the discussion today, may be moot for a lot of reasons, but it's certainly moot if the $1.2 trillion isn't spent. What I prepared for, though, was a conversation about the 3.5. So for a minute, let's assume that we're all in either quiescent disagreement or agreement on the 1.2.
We agree that 3.5 is really 5 billion. It's not 3.5, it's 5 billion. Trillion, excuse me.
Elaborate on that.
Some of the aspects of that bill are 3-year bills, so they can spread it over 10 and make it look like 3.5. But they can do the rest of it to get it to 5 in 3-year increments, and that's just BS in my world.
I take that. I know people on the other side would say it's not 3.5, it's closer to 1.8 because there's a lot of pay for in it. We don't pay for a lot of things, and I will talk about that. But it's also interesting, that point's a really important point to understand what's going to happen in the news the next 3 or 4 days or weeks. Because the trick that the Democrats will use to make the 3.5 not 3.5, much less 5, the trick they'll use to get it back down to 1.5 is precisely that. We're going to count only 2 years instead of 5, or spread things that are over 2 years over 15. Whatever that required to get a number that Manchin can say, I said I wouldn't vote for more than 1.5. You've now got it down to 1.5. I'll vote for it. And while I know there'll be some resistance to smoke and mirrors, I guarantee there'll be smoke and mirrors if anything's going to happen. But it's a good chance nothing will happen. Can we just talk a little bit about what's in that bill? And back up just for a second. Doug's point, and I take the point seriously, even if it's good, fixing bridges that are about to fall can't be bad. I mean, Lord God. Even if it's good, if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. That's essentially your point, right?
The roads and bridges would have been passed a long time ago if it had just made a road and bridges bill.
What'd you say?
Again, if Forrest is going to talk, we need to have mine.
What I've said is the road and bridges alone, and you could probably put broadband in there with it, would have passed a long time ago if they had just done it.
Why didn't we do it under the 4 years of a Trump presidency, 2 years of which had
They had
Republicans?
the resistance on the other side, just like
2 years you had a Republican majority. Why didn't we do it
There are a
then?
few other things that the Democrats did, like 2 impeachment processes. You had a guy trying to rebuild the military that Obama destroyed. There are a lot of reasons Trump didn't bring it up.
Okay. But I take your point totally. A roads and bridges bill should pass automatically should have passed anytime. How late are we on fixing the bridges and roads? Did they say a 30-year backlog? I mean, it's embarrassing. And one of the problems is we paid for it out of a gas tax and we weren't increasing the gas tax. And it's not illogical to say don't do it if you can't afford it. So taking Doug's point very seriously, and generally he's opposed to good things we can't afford. And I guess most of you here would agree with that comment. Even if it's a good thing to do, if you can't afford it, you shouldn't do it. Is that? Well, one of the questions I'd want to put then generally is, what can this country afford? And I want you just to hold that question in the back of your mind for a second. Let's go through the 3.5. Now, the problem I have with most of the data that I could get on this, when I watch the news, they're able to break this into component parts far more intelligently than I've been able to. Online, most of it falls according to the committee of the House that was considering the block of money. And so this slide, by the way, you can find this on 8 different sites online. This information looks at the allocation by committee, which is how Congress decides things. The committee with the largest block of money out of the 3.5 to consider was the Finance Committee. And the reason for that is that of the 3.5, the 1.8 assigned to them is largely takes the form of tax cuts. And those tax cuts take the form of child tax credits, maternity tax credits, things that are not so much spending money as not collecting money, if you follow what I'm saying. In this component, so first of all, think in your minds, is it a good idea to extend the child tax credit? Is it a good idea to to reduce taxes for families making less than $400,000 a year? Is it a good idea to lower the cost of prescription drugs, for which we pay 2 or 3 times what other countries pay?
Yes.
Okay, some yeses on prescription drugs. What about child tax credits?
Well, how can lowering prescription drugs change the budget? I mean, that affects the producer and the consumer, and to me, I'm oblivious to, I don't see how that would make a difference.
Two things about that. First of all, how does that affect, are we spending or not spending money by a negotiation that goes place? I couldn't agree more. On the other hand, and I don't know, frankly, how they score to that component. Is that the $1 million you spend to negotiate with a drug company? I don't even know how they score it, or what the component. This just is a copy from something on the web. I didn't make this up, so I can't quite explain it. Ensuring that wealthy and large corporations pay their share of taxes. How does that figure into 1.8 trillion? I don't know. Doug?
Let me go back to the prescription drug one. Okay, at time one, if through governmental action, I just say, the price of prescription drugs is reduced, that will benefit the Medicare program, also Medicaid. That's at time one. But this will obviously have an impact on the financial results of the drug companies. And so their investment in future drugs, whether it be Alzheimer's or cancer or whatever, they're not going to have as much money to do that. The money to invest in drug research is concentrated in the United States. And that's what these drug prices we pay end up financing that. So at time one, yes, the government would spend less on prescription drugs through the Medicare program and Medicaid. But at time two, there won't be any new drugs.
Point taken. Where did the Pfizer the pandemic shot that we take, where was that developed?
Germany.
By a Turkish Doctor, wasn't one of them a Turk that had migrated to Germany?
Yes.
And I don't know about Moderna. Wasn't Moderna UK?
No. That was AstraZeneca.
Oh, AstraZeneca was UK. I mean, I don't know. The reason I ask that is that the two things that I see on television are ads saying if we allow Medicare the government to negotiate drug prices, I'll lose my particular drug because they'll say it's not effective. One, and two, we won't have money to invest in things. Forrest?
Bob, the reason that warp speed worked, regardless of where the scientist was, whether it's Germany or Turkey or somewhere else in the world, the money that Trump allocated to the various drug companies, Pfizer and others, Moderna, but that money's a front-end jolt of money, went all over the world to help get it done. And he hasn't got a dime's worth of credit for it.
I would also add, let's say with respect to the Pfizer drug or the Moderna, but case, let's say Pfizer, let's assume it was initially developed in Germany. The manufacturing of that drug is a very complicated process. And Pfizer had the expertise to do that. And I've got a grandson who's essentially works as a consultant in the drug industry. He primarily works with Eli Lilly, although he's not a Lilly employee. But he goes around to their various drug manufacturing plants. And when they're putting in a new line, he's the one that audits the whole manufacturing process, that it's safe. Trying to manufacture, let's say, the Pfizer drug in a third world country, I'm almost going to say, is impossible. Now, it might be possible in some place like India where they've got some experience with drug manufacturing. But it's not just the development of it in the lab, it's being able to manufacture it in quantities of hundreds of millions of doses.
Yeah. Stu?
I may be wrong, but I don't think Pfizer took government money to develop the vaccine. I think they did that on their own. I may be wrong.
Well, I remember there was some...
The last point there, ensuring the wealthy and large corporations pay their fair share of taxes, that's to replace the lack of revenue from the 2017 tax reform bill.
Whether it replaces that or pays for this, doesn't matter. It is an increase in revenue. I have a breakdown of the tax stuff in a minute. Sal, there's a question over here.
Merck has a drug that
Wait.
Getting my workout. Merck has a new drug that just came out today, which is supposed to be absolutely incredible for people who already have COVID.
No, I saw that. And where's is Merck a U.S. company?
The virus. The virus, right.
Is Merck a U.S. company?
Yeah. Merck. That's all I want to say. Okay. Yeah, they heard it. Repeat it, Bob.
Okay, yeah, Merck came out with a new antibody thing.
This question is for Doug. Why did the drug companies give lower prices to other countries than they do to the citizens of this country?
I guess on basic economics, you can ultimately, if you choose to, price on a variable cost basis. So if you're covering your variable cost, let's say at a lower cost of a third world country, you still have some profit for the corporation. But you have to have a base of customers that will cover all of your fixed costs. So if you're, I use a transportation example. Let's say air freight. It's expensive to provide an air freight system. Let's say a FedEx has or UPS has. With the overnight freight market. But they also have second and third day markets where they have a little flexibility in how to move that, and they can price that on a variable cost basis.
So you think it's all right that we can order the same drug at a lower price from Canada than you can buy it from CVS?
I'm going to leave it up to the drug company's management for making those choices. Those are choices that they make, and I'm pretty confident they probably make those choices in their self-interest. And my guess is when they're selling the drug to Canada or they're selling it to a third world country, they are cash positive as a result of that decision.
But don't you also think the fact that many of the countries outside the United States that have some form of nationalized medicine negotiate more stiffly with the drug companies? In other words, you can sell it to Canada, but you can't sell it to Canada at a price they won't pay. Wouldn't the drug companies charge as much as they can charge in any one of the countries where they go? They don't say, this is a poor country, and I've covered my fixed cost, I'll just sell this at variable cost plus a little cash. They sell it for them as much as they can get from everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be correct.
And all the countries that get it at a lower price than ours have some mechanism that allows them to negotiate better prices.
That's a decision that the drug company makes.
But the drug company isn't making a decision, at least I would be suspicious about, or skeptical about a decision to make less money than I can in any market.
Let me just take a little slight turn here. Let's say with the Pfizer vaccine. The Pfizer vaccine is readily available in the United States. Any of us can just walk over there to Publix or CVS and get it. The Pfizer vaccine is not readily available in many countries of the world. Sometimes it's because they don't have the logistics. Other times that the finances aren't there. We get preference on let's say the Pfizer drug, the Moderna drug.
I think after Warp Speed we should. Yeah. Because, yeah. And that goes back to something that I want to talk about later when we finish some of this other discussion. What can we and what can't we afford? As a country, as rich as we are, that we make the Pfizer vaccine and the other vaccines free is absolutely obvious. Of course we can afford to do that. Of course we can. We've got more money than God. And it'll show when we compare some of these expenditures here. It's just silly. What we spend for defense as a percentage of our budget and in real dollars it vastly exceeds any other country in the world, and we're still rich. Let's keep going just a second. Just the tax cuts,
No, let's move on.
yeah, just the tax cuts that are in that Finance Committee's things. This is a little bit of a breakdown from them. Of course, green tax cuts, and if you don't believe there's climate change, it's hard to support green tax cuts, but there they are. They're pretty large. The child tax credit, they didn't break out the actual dollar figures. It's $300 a month per child under 6, $250 per child, 6 to 17. But how much of that 1.8 trillion is that? Is that 200 million or what? I don't know. An interesting debate about the green tax cut for electric vehicles. And I thought this was interesting. Kevin Brady, a Texas Republican, points out that those of us who buy, I didn't, but who would buy BMW or Jag or Benz electric cars and get a big tax deduction for doing so. Now he's suggesting that that tax deduction comes from a made in Texas, when in fact the made in Texas isn't paying taxes, so she's not paying $12,500 toward that car. But that's an interesting argument. The point is, it's his argument. Then down here, the response, we're not subsidizing the wealthiest to buy vehicles. We've got a cap on the sales price of the sedans and a cap on the adjusted gross income to take the deduction. But look at the cap. How many people are making $600,000 a year? And we're going to see that kind of a cap over and over and over again. What we call taxing the middle class in our lament about taxes is taxing what are really traditionally very wealthy people. Let's keep going. Education Committee 726. How do you feel about pre-K education? Is that something we support as a general rule, making it mandatory? By hands? Interesting. Those opposed to pre-K education for everybody? Well, nobody's opposed to no bill. Nobody else? Child care for working families. One of the reasons there's a shortage of workers today, and I'm not going to say this is a big one because I'm perplexed by the shortage of workers. But clearly one of the reasons for it is that mothers can't afford the cost of child care so they can go to work. Is that something we would support or not support? Community college. 2 years of community college, not Harvard, Yale, community college, paid for everybody in the country. Bottom line is we're going to approach Europe at an educational standard of from 2 to 20, paid for, available, paid for by the government. Charlie?
This is really a big item here, 726 million. That's big. And looking at these items, I think there's certain questions when we deal. I don't know about the universal care for 3 and 4-year-olds. I think it depends how many are they going to be. It's a matter of numbers. But I don't have a feeling one way or the other. Child care for working families, again, is going to be a question about how many. Tuition-free community college. I come back to the same thing. And here I'm saying, what's being taught? That's really what I'm interested in, is what is the curriculum going to be? Funding for historically black colleges and universities. Again, I'm looking at what is going to be taught there. Is it going to be something that supports the American, so-called American, or are we going to be looking at something where it's moving towards socialism? Expansion of the Pell Grant for higher education. I'm not.
Pell Grants are
I haven't really looked at that.
a lot of poor people who in college.
Yeah. So what we're dealing here with is really about our feelings for the people getting what they're going to get. And the question then comes up about, for me it is, the question of respect, because that often comes into, do we respect all of these people coming into the country, legally, not illegally, people who are on property payments, and so on. So this sort of gets me back to all of them. I was just looking at a list of, you talk about respect. I looked at the dictionary. What does it mean? And there's 2 definitions to respect in the dictionary I looked at. One was to have a high regard for the feelings, wishes, rights of others. Well, it's hard to fight that. But the other definition was a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something for their abilities, qualities, or achievements. And that was the kind of tie into a lot of these things. So I'm moving a little bit away from the dollars, and I'm looking at why are we doing it for people and who's going to be benefiting from it.
Well, among other things, let me just say, the whole point here is to move away from the dollars. If these things were free, would we support them? And then you go through, well, what is it worth?
Well, I love education. There are teachers through multiple generations in our families. And I went to Georgia Tech. Most of the money I earned myself for $8,000. If you go to Georgia Tech today, which is a pretty inexpensive state university with a quality result, it's probably depending on the kid and what they do or don't do. It's probably somewhere in the order, no matter how cheap you try to do it, probably $180,000. Think about the inflation rate and the education cost, and it's largely due to things like Pell Grants, student loans. Student loans, I wonder, and I bet y'all think about this sometime when you hear somebody complain about the debt of students that come out of college. There's no way they can ever pay the debt off if they were to be a musician or a teacher or whatever. It's just gross to me how the inflation community, education community is inflating their costs. Just you just put a Pell Grant at $2,500, you raise it, it's the same thing, just keeps moving up. Same way with college loans. You've got kids that'll pay for cases of beer with interest for 20 years. It's just insane.
Larry?
I'd just like to follow up on the Georgia Tech comment that Boris was making. I've got a grandson that will graduate at the end of this year from Georgia Tech. And I have to say, I'm just very intimately familiar with what it costs to go to Georgia Tech. But he is blessed that under the scholarship program, the Hope, whatever it is, in Georgia, He has attended Georgia Tech tuition free. And you gotta have an ACT like of at least 34 or 35 to get in there. Now, yes, he has his room and board and so forth. That's all still there. But the state of Georgia knows that if they can keep someone that's let's say a graduate of Georgia Tech in Georgia, all the jobs they're going to create. So here's a case where the state of Georgia has really addressed this, I think.
I think many states are doing it, something similar. What do we have, Bright Star or something like that here, the state program in Florida? Let's make another day about college costs and get some people. I'd love to get somebody like John Delaney, who's president of UNF, and have him talk about why in the world it costs what it costs. Where's the money go? My daughter taught law school. She was not, I don't think, grossly overpaid. Maybe modestly overpaid, but then again, she's my daughter. Let's move on. So the whole point is this whole education cost. If you look at that 726, by the way, one of the mistakes we make when we look at the cost of this budget, what are we spending on defense this year? Does anybody know? $778 billion.
Which is 2 or 3%.
We got to raise that.
$778 billion. Look at what they're talking about spending on education, right? Isn't that ridiculous? Except that's not $726 billion. It's 1/10 of that.
That's apples and oranges, Bob.
Well, but my point is, when you look at these dollar costs, or where's the money coming, where's the money going, this isn't comparable to that. This is only $70 million a year only. Divided by 10, that's my point.
That question.
Jeannie?
I think the cost of the education is a separate issue. And I think what we're talking about is equality in these other areas. And that just like Medicare says certain limits on what they will allow to be charged by a doctor, the government could set up those kind of limits for the sources of the education that would be available. And that still pre-K is pre-K, and I don't care how much it costs, we have to have some way of equalizing the basis on which children grow up and are ready to attend regular school.
Here's a breakdown by this thing. I'll send these slides out because there's a lot of data that I was able to find. Here's the actual dollar breakdown of those components that I found somewhere else. You can all read that as easily as I can.
Oops.
Sorry?
Even on a few minutes.
Oh. You know, almost everything in this I consider, and personally, I think these are all good things. They're nice to have. Is it nice to have at the cost, is the family leave cost up there? $225 billion over 10 years for family leave. It's a lot of money. Is it, again, I go back to what Jeannie just said. We have to separate cost from the thing. Is the thing good? And then should we pay for it? And then how much should we pay for it? Are all questions. This whole idea of earnings of $4,000 a month with the lowest paid workers getting family leave worth, is this right? 80% of their income, from what I understand. Okay, now these are programs in other committees, by the way, that deal with homelessness, immigrants themselves, and Native Americans. $332 billion for housing affordability. Now, if you go to Seattle or Los Angeles or San Francisco today, I don't think we see it as much here, but there are these tent cities along the streets. Homelessness is a serious issue. And trying to address that homelessness is what part of this bill would do. Housing affordability, when I started my career in low-income housing, that was a major activity for apartment builders. today, government subsidized apartments are built far as a share of the total apartment construction is much smaller than it was 50 years ago, increasing the amount of low-income and subsidized housing as part of this bill. It's a good thing. $107 billion for the lawful permanent status of qualified immigrants. Of course, if one doesn't believe that immigrants should be lawful, you would not want that component. On the other hand, if you do think, how can you say that's not a good thing? And finally, $20 billion for Indian affairs. I just think that's one of those topics none of us likes to talk about to the extent we should. The shaft that no pun, that they've been given over the centuries, there's not an amount of money that makes sense. Climate change, again, should we address droughts, forest fires? Charlie, you're saying no, and by that, what do you mean?
Well, I just know what I read in the newspaper, or whatever.
John.
Secretary.
I just know about the subject from what I read or see on television, so I have no expertise at all. But from some of the people reading it, this is nothing new. This has been going on for thousands, who knows, millions of years.
But addressing it might be something new. The fact that there have always been floods doesn't mean we shouldn't address trying to help people in flood zone areas or flood prone areas.
Well, it depends upon how much you're going to put into it. Climate change is a big, big subject, covers a lot.
It's a lot of this program.
I don't know, but I would sustain that some people believe that it's overblown and that the threat is not what some people say it is. So,
Forrest has a comment.
I feel like this is one of the areas where the government is so completely inconsistent and irritating to me personally. It's just maddening to me that we've got 50% roughly of this country is owned by the U.S. government, and they don't have any forest management practices that eliminate or largely reduce forest fire risk. And the West has been ablaze all this year for the most part, it probably still is in some states. And the huge fires with a lot of pollution involved. And the government program, they don't allow controlled burns, puts it in that situation. It's ridiculous. You got to have all that understory there. It's just like all you need is a little lightning or a match.
Yeah. I don't pretend to know very much about that. I would think after a number of these fires, there's not much of that undergrowth left.
There will be.
Oh,
They'll
yes.
right back in that road next year.
It takes no more than a year for it to grow back and
Yes.
then become thinner. Interesting. And so they can control the fires again. But the point is, somebody has to pay for that. The people to do it, the organizations to do it, and this bill provides more money for that. But I guess I hear you saying, and maybe what they're doing is simply wasting money, but I hear you saying this is something that needs to be done.
But you've also got forests there that are a very valuable resource that would reduce the cost of lumber if they would actually forest the land in a responsible manner, because trees don't grow to heaven. A pine tree in the south goes up to about 100 feet, and it will continue to get girth over time. But you could take that tree out and put some seedlings in the same area and grow a lot of trees.
Have you put your name in yet to work with the forestry group? Because you've got a lot of good ideas.
That's the name.
I'd like to put you in charge.
I wouldn't be in charge of anything. But I would try to take a responsible view of both sides.
No, again, I don't know all the issues here. I do think that the people who work in these different fields are pretty serious. And they think they're doing the best or want to do the
I
best.
don't believe that for a second.
Whoops.
You don't believe it?
I don't believe that most of those people are working in a responsible way. I think they're working in a political way in whichever side they happen to be on. That's what I think, the leadership.
Okay. Any more comments on forest fires, environments? How about a fleet of federally owned electric vehicles? How much is that worth? How about paying for electric charging stations across the country? I mean, these are all costs incurred in this bill. Now, I just want to put some perspectives up because we're running out of time and it's been hard to organize this. And this is the thing that makes me wonder all the time what we're talking about for many of these expenses. Our cumulative GDP over the next 10-year period, which is the period of this bill, will be just under $300 trillion. This bill represents less than 2% of that cost. What is it, 1.2% before considering new taxes. And if you add in the impact of the new taxes, which will reduce the net cost, it's even less. And compare that to defense spending, which is at $7.5 trillion over that same time period, twice the cost of this bill. Are we getting, for the money we spend on the defense, $780 billion this year, a comparable value as we would for the infrastructure programs? I don't know.
Bob, I sit here and argue for the right all day.
But I hate to see that.
As a moderator, I am really frustrated because you are promoting the left.
Oh, but I'm not
It's
saying.
one of these issues, you're personally supporting the left. Why don't you moderate it and deal with both sides with the best advocates we can have for either side? Rather than being the advocate for the left and that side and let somebody in the audience be an argument for the right.
Okay, I confess to being somewhat frequently on the left.
Often.
Is there anybody on the left who will replace me in that role so that all I have to do is moderate? I'm serious. You and Doug and Charlie and Bill and several articulate people on the right.
If you're going to sit there and promote the left, I would be here supporting the right.
Well, okay, fine, but I wish somebody else would take the other side. All I want to do is see us talk a little bit about both sides. Sue, you'll take the left.
No.
Oh, no.
Right, and you have dominated the discussion.
We can't hear you.
Wait a minute. You always take the right. You dominated the session, so why are you on to Bob?
Hey, look,
Give me a
if
break.
it's going to be that strong on the left, I'll be over here to the right. Thank you.
Okay, why don't we go back to our ground rules? We're here to learn, not to fight. And somebody has to have an opinion on both sides. So as the wife of Bob, where's Carol Travis here today? Shall we stand up for stand by our men and just say, conversation is good. People in this room will form their opinions based on both you and Bob and Doug and Charlie and those liberals who are not speaking up, because many liberals in this kind of community are petrified and are in the closet.
But one of the things I do want to say, thank you, Sally Ann. One of these, Jen?
The right.
Come on.
Well, I have a question about all of this that we've been looking at. Here's my question. Everything you're looking at is government spending, which kind of goes against some of us that we don't like the government meddling in so many things. Some of those things I see that private industry should be paying for. Now, I know some of the big companies do provide, I'll say, childcare free. I also know that I have my first great-granddaughter, and it's costing quite a bit of money for my granddaughter, who is a PA at a hospital, for which he has to pay for the hospital's childcare. Should the hospital be providing this child care free, not us getting funds from the government? The same way with some of the education. We know that there are scholarships available at our universities, but are they providing funds for those that can't afford? Or do you just have to have this big high rating?
I really do want to respond to that. Let me take Sue first.
Most hospitals are nonprofits, so where do you suppose that this wait a minute.
You keep talking without a mic.
Excuse me. Most hospitals are nonprofit, so where do you suppose they're going to raise this revenue to pay for child care? They're already squeezed because Medicare and Medicaid pays very little of the total that's charged.
Yeah, I'm going to just address the private sector side of this thing. 40 years ago, 41 years ago, when Reagan was elected, a significant change in the attitude of the private sector started to take place. And I don't know whether some of the rest of you who've been in the private sector will support this or not, and I'm open for you not to. In my own experience, I thought the cheapest way to compensate my employees was really good health insurance, some kind of a profit sharing plan, and fringe benefits, which I would have called child care. Scholarships, I even had scholarships. As the company grew, and I brought in more internationally qualified people, I'm thinking now, Sal, of our Human Resources Director or Vice President, he said, but you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to pay for the health care, but you don't have to pay for all the health care. You can insist upon a fairly high deductible and a fairly high copay. You don't have to pay a pension anymore. You can contribute to a 401k program or an IRA, but you don't have to do that pension, which we had to do before. What you have to do is generate value to shareholders. And if you do that, and you do that well, you've done your job. Don't fool around with this other stuff. Now, for Doug and Bill and Forrest, you're all private sector, you're more on the finance side, but did you see that developing in your company?
I'd like to make a comment.
I mean, I don't know whether it was generally true, but I read that it was.
This is on, let's say, some of the employees that, I'm going to give you an example of medical care. I work for a trucking company.
Yeah, you're right.
One of the office jobs we had was dealing with what we call OS&D, over, short, and damage. So you have a lot of irate customers calling up, where's my freight? My freight, these kinds of issues. So we needed to get essentially a high grade of employee to do that. Where was that market? That market was for mothers that might want to work from 9 to 3, a 6-hour day, or it might be a 5-hour day. How do we attract them? If they work 20 hours a week, we offered them medical. Full medical, the same as a full-time employee. And what happened? We got a high-quality, part-time employee. I have to admit, primarily women, but they could deal with these irate customers, we would call them. Okay, I'll give you another example. We started a company that would have sorts at all hours of the day and night. It would be about 4 or 5 hour shift. Okay, we wanted young, like college-age type people. The way we did it is we offered scholarships. This is not something they had to apply for. It was part of the benefits of the job. And what happened? We got the people that we wanted, and they got scholarships for going to school. And so there are two examples where a trucking company came up with, on the one hand, a scholarship program. Now, I know today Amazon is doing the same thing, and it's like they're a great beneficiary to society. Well, I'll be honest, we did it for selfish interest because we got better people by offering the scholarships. Likewise with the women in the office working part time, we got high quality people that could deal with irate customers. So those are two examples of a private enterprise in their own self-interest coming up with benefit programs that help the employee.
The problem I have with that, Doug, and it goes back to what Jerry was saying, can we turn child care over to the private sector, confident that in their self-interest, they'll do enough of that to provide child care for our society? And again, I don't want to be taking the left or the right. I'm asking you as a question. Having been a businessman who offered those benefits at the beginning. Jenny again? Let's let Jenny go first for us.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jeannie, can you give Jenny the...
Can you hear me?
No.
She's coming.
And even if we can hear you, it's not recorded.
I've waited so long, I might even forget what I was going to say. I think what I wanted to say to you very briefly is, you said, can we trust the private?
Trust, rely upon.
Either one.
Yeah.
I'll say to you, can we trust the government for the right kind of child care?
You asked the question to an open audience. Now,
Bob, this is really shocking, but I agree with what you said about the benefits you provided in your company. We provide 2 more that you didn't name, plus all the ones you did name. Every employee in our company has a stock purchase plan from day one. And secondly, we provided all their education for increasing their formal education.
we provide all of those too. But the fact that you and I did it, I think if we look at the data on the country as a whole, the amount of fringe benefits provided by private sector employers over the last 40 years has gone down. And it's gone down because it's been possible to let it go down. People will work for less. Maybe not the best people, but people will work for less. And the mantra, do what's best for the shareholder, not necessarily what's best for yourselves or best for the employees. What's best for the shareholder is the governing mantra.
You act like that's some sacrilege, but the average profit in the U.S. corporations is somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 or 5%.
And again, I'm not saying, well, I am. We're rapidly running out of time, and what we've proven today is that complex issues may not be the easiest to discuss in this forum. Would you all agree? This is tough.
No, let's don't stop discussing complex
Okay,
issues
good.
because they're tough.
The record,
That's
I'd like to-
beneath you.
Thank
Don't
you.
do that.
Bob, nobody wants your spot.
One of the things that's going on right now, the reason this is current events, this is what we call this group. Today, people that were elected by us and others are grappling exactly the same way we are with these same issues and many of the same views. Many people who believe the government shouldn't be doing this stuff because you can't trust the government to do it right. Remember Adam Guyette said the last thing or quoted, I think, Reagan saying, the worst 9 words in the world were, I'm here for the government to help you. Okay, this is not just an idle group of people with crazy opinions. This is being talked about in Washington right now. Doug?
I want to thank you for taking this on.
But now, I just want to give some hints for what to look for over the next week. I think Manchin's $1.5 trillion cap is going to work. It's going to be the cap. I think right now the progressives started, they said at $6 trillion, they dropped to $3.5 trillion. I don't think there's a hope in hell there's going to be much more than $1.5 trillion because Manchin has that much capability, especially he alone. That one person is going to decide what this bill is going to be. Secondly, I think the $1.5 trillion, and we'll see it worked out, watch for it in the news, is going to involve a lot of smoke and mirrors. A lot of accounting tricks, a lot of scheduling tricks to get to a headline number that's 1.5.
I have a question.
Go. We need a microphone. My wife just had a new knee because she can't run.
Something is happening in our country that does not relate to any of this, but it's very close to my heart. This business of the fact that possibly Roe versus Wade will be overturned is very, very dear to my heart and to many women's hearts. I'd like to consider this. I know it's a very dangerous subject to talk about, but can we consider something like this?
I think it's an excellent. I personally have not had an abortion, nor do I plan to have one in the remaining years of my life.
It's not funny.
I know it's not funny. I think, and by the way, I think that's a really important thing. While this is going on, there is still ostensibly a crisis at the border. There's still a pandemic. Afghanistan is certainly not getting better day by day. We face, I believe, the biggest single problem in this country today is threats to democracy. Absent a voting rights bill, any theory of a democracy goodbye.
First of all, thank you. I share the same thoughts that came from Doug, and doing a great job here. I do have a suggestion. This was an awful big thing to wrap our arms around, or to try. Almost impossible, I think. Because these subjects are so important, let's slice them up a little bit smaller so we can get our arms around it and concentrate on it, because we're taking on too much in 1 hour.
And if we can't solve it in 1 hour, I wouldn't be surprised if Congress can. But what we should do, and I worry about Roe versus Wade only because it's so sensitive an issue. I think most of us have a position on it, and neither side will change. But I'm happy if that's the sense of the group, they want to talk about that, I'd go for it. I'd also go for a voting rights day. I think it makes some sense to talk about the border. We haven't talked about that in a long time. Any other ideas for topics I'm open to? Otherwise, I'm going to pick something smaller sliced next week.
I think at what point you could consider what is the responsible limitations of government?
And again, that's a good one that we could talk about. That's small, factor has been the main topic of political science for 5 centuries. But it's important. What should government do? And a small government, a limited government position, one that is clearly favored by the political right today, is one I understand. And I don't want to be the only advocate of a more expansive government. And I don't want this to be a debate of the moderator against the right. And I hope you all appreciate that. That's not a comfortable role. It's past 11. I get to stop. Thank you all very much.